So it's been 140 years yesterday since the death of Karl Marx, and it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. And we have the Socialist Worker celebrating it here, saying here's all of the modern literature in all its forms as it's been adapted to race, sex, class, nationality, and all of the various intersectional avenues that are polluting our society. Here's some reading materials. I thought, rather than memorialising Marx, we'd go through some of the facts of his lifetimes and crimes as to why, that many people don't know why actually, he is one of the most evil men who has ever lived, despite never claiming a life directly. If you'd like to know more about the evil lies of communism, you can watch our book clubs on George Orwell's Animal Farm. It's the only book club that's a two-parter. It turned impromptu. I specifically raised part 2 because Bo and I discussed how the promise of real communism was always a false bill of goods because it is founded on the labour theory of value, which is economically illiterate, and it's just the justification that Marx used to designate an entire group of people who were more wealthy and successful than him as worthy of killing and stealing their stuff, and it always results in dictatorship. So the ideology itself actively incentivizes the most contemptuous and resentful people to rise to the top, and then just sort of expects them to give up all that power, redistribute property, and we'll all live in harmony forever. It's nonsense. It's just Marx's way of enriching himself because he was so afraid of his own mediocrity. So let's go to this tweet first. And I wanted to bring up a couple of mine just because it was particularly relevant yesterday. I stumbled downstairs on Monday, and in the lobby of Lotus's building, there was the BBC playing because the man at the desk was watching it. And a gentleman on here talking about Gary Lineker has a statue of Karl Marx in frame. Now, I understand that the BBC impartiality issue is just a lie, because you're never going to get impartiality. But we are forced to pay for this. And it got me thinking, what other person would be able to be had on a T-shirt or a statue with the same ideological vitriol in shot? Like, you couldn't have
Hitler behind you, could you, or Stalin?
No, well, you could have Mao if you're Diane Abbott, I suppose, because she said that Mao did more harm than good. But you couldn't have Augusto Pinochet.
She said he did more good than harm, yeah.
Yeah, other way around. There we go, yeah.
It's outrageous.
I'm starting to talk like Diane Abbott now, apparently. You couldn't have someone like Oswald Mosley on there, and I'm happy to condemn those figures, but for some reason, Karl Marx's legacy is not quite as disgraced as the people he inspired. And even then, some people still try and make excuses. I think it's just because he's so boring a writer, people haven't properly read him.
Yeah.
I read a lot of Marx. Soon on lotuseaters.com, you'll be getting an audio track and a very lengthy 7,000 to 8,000 word article on why real Marxism has already been tried and murder was always the goal, because I went through his biography and his and Engels' writings, and there's some really eye-opening stuff in there. But I thought I'd just go to this tweet, because this did very well yesterday, actually. I'm quite chuffed. I don't actually know what the likes are up to now, but my definition of very well is the kind of tweet that Karl just throws out on a weekend without thinking about it, because he does so well. I just went through some of the biographical facts about Marx, and I thought I'd just tell our audience a little bit about it today, because there were lots of people, including Larry Elder, who is a real hero of mine, who decided to share it. If we go to the next one, please.
That's cool.
John. Larry Elder's interview with Dave Rubin actually was one of the main things that set me on the path of understanding challenging political narratives and forming my own moral views. And his story about his father is really inspirational as well. It's wonderful. And also Dean Cain as well, former Superman, so that was cool. They decided to share it, but they were surprised at the contents of it. And so lots of people don't know the biographical facts of Marx. So I thought I'd just read through a few here. And I don't know how much of this you will know, Calvin, but some of this is taken from Paul Kengel's book, The Devil and Karl Marx. He is a devout American Catholic. Michael Knowles wrote the foreword, so there's a bit of a theme going through this podcast. He believes that Marx was possessed. I don't necessarily buy that. But if anyone were to be possessed by a demon, he certainly had the characteristics for it. And his dad thought so as well. His dad actually said, I think you're possessed by a demon. And Marx decided not to show up to his dad's funeral because he said he was too busy. Lovely gentleman. Despite taking loads of money throughout his lifetime from his parents and from Engels because he didn't work. So this is from a Prussian police report. They were staking out Marx's apartment. And I want to list this off just because this is the kind of character that Marx thought of him. Marx conducted himself as in life and thought of himself as the perfect person to steward utopia into being.
Yeah.
Quote, washing, grooming and changing his linens are things he does rarely, and he likes to get drunk. He has no fixed time for going to sleep or waking up. As for the family apartment, everything is broken down, busted, spilled, smashed, falling apart, from toys and chairs and dishes and cups to tables and tobacco pipes and on and on. In a word, the report says, everything is topsy-turvy. To sit down becomes a thoroughly dangerous business. Now, bear in mind, this disorganisation, he had 6 children and a wife brought into this, and it was entirely subsidised by his friends and family. He also never washed. He had a skin condition, which meant that the skin hardened and broke out into pustules. But because he didn't wash and he didn't manage it, he had boils covering his backside to the point where he couldn't sit down. And I included if you just scroll down slightly, John, I included a photo in my tweet of
No.
Marx here.
Not the pustules.
No, and people were going, well, he's sitting down, so you've been debunked.
Yeah.
Right, but Marx wrote letters talking to Engels about how his face had broken out into so many hives he couldn't leave the house.
Wow.
So just because he sat down for one photo there doesn't mean that he wasn't plagued by boils that he could have otherwise managed.
An unhygienic alcoholic slob. How pleasant.
Yep. His father, as I said, wrote, "Since that your heart is obviously animated and governed by a demon not granted to all men, is that demon heavenly or Faustian? Will you ever, and that is not the least painful doubt of my heart, will you ever be capable of truly human domestic happiness?"
Wow, that's deep.
So that's why he didn't attend his dad's funeral. He also didn't attend his wife's funeral because he said he was too bedbound ill to make it out there. Speaking of his treatment to his wife and his children, for a while, he was so destitute because he wasn't getting any donations and he was slumming it about in Europe between 1848 and 1850. So he was in Brussels, Paris, Cologne, and London. And it was very, very cold that he caused the deaths from living conditions of 2 of his sons. So he and Jenny had a newborn called Heinrich Guido, who was named after his dad, and he died of cold exposure. And then in 1855, his 8-year-old son Edgar, who Marx apparently loved very much, though he didn't treat him very well, it seems, he died of intestinal tuberculosis exacerbated by unhealthy living conditions. And that's according to one of Marx's biographers, who's very sympathetic to him. And Jenny actually never forgave him for this. So this was a major rift in their relationship. Another rift in their relationship was the fact that he raped his unpaid housemaid, Helen Lenchen Demuth. In June 1851, she gave birth to a baby boy, and Marx always refused to concede the fact that it was his, and had Engels pay for it throughout his lifetime. 4 of his kids actually died before he did, including his oldest daughter, also named Jenny, and she died of cancer, so that was unrelated, though cancer is brought on by lifetime stress in many cases, and I think lifetime stress definitely influenced the deaths of his other 2 daughters, because Eleanor and Laura committed suicide by both drinking or injecting themselves with poison, which is curious because Marx dedicated a poem called Nocturnal Love to his wife, which was about a suicide pact between 2 lovers. So you can only imagine the kind of household those 2 girls were growing up in. Eleanor had tried to kill herself with an opium overdose, and then she would try again by entering into a suicide pact with Havelock Aveling, who she was his mistress of. She had actually been dating George Bernard Shaw, who was the socialist playwright, and Havelock Ellis. I don't know if you recognise that name, but he was the man who Margaret Sanger went off to Europe to elope with and then found Planned Parenthood.
Okay.
So if your thesis is the devil's working through all these people, then it is definitely the death drive of destruction at work here.
Explicitly so.
Yeah. So Eleanor, on the evening of March 31st, 1898, used a combination of chloroform and prussic acid to kill herself. Aveling said he would. After she was dead, he went and shacked up with a 22-year-old girlfriend and inherited all of her possessions and didn't consummate his side of the bargain. So, kind of people that you surround yourself with in socialist circles. 13 years later, the only remaining Marx daughter, that was Laura, and her husband Paul, who had owned a zoo and he was a Cuban immigrant. He was from Cuba. They killed themselves. And Marx, throughout their lifetime, had disowned Laura for marrying Paul because he had called him some words that I can't fully repeat here, but including gorilla and negrillo.
Oh.
So Marx, very progressive. Also, don't read on the Jewish question if you want to stay on the internet and not be cancelled, I suppose. So they both killed themselves on November the 25th and 26th, 1911. So these are the kind of people that were in Marx's orbit. This is how he treated his own family. This is the contaminating force that he inflicted on the world. And it's not a surprise when him and Engels said things like this, which is that the bloody birth throes of the new society should arrive from revolutionary terror, and that the next version of the French Revolution should be a revolution so bloody, beside which the French Revolution was child's play. Engels also predicted the disappearance from the face of the earth, not only of reactionary classes and dynasties, but the entire reactionary people in a global war, and then said this would be a very good opportunity to build socialism on top of. And the reason I've written that is I replied to a Newham councillor who asked for receipts and said, maybe you're confusing Marx and with Lenin, because he obviously wasn't murderous. If you just scroll down, please, John. I did actually provide the sources there. Some people did note that he was basically nuked off the internet by that fact. But the point being is you're a self-identified socialist who hasn't read Marx and Engels. Yeah. You don't know anything about his life. You don't know anything about the ideology. That's how this ensnares people. It's a promise to the mediocre to empower themselves without realizing that the reason it always fails is because this is the caliber of person that enacted this ideology. I mean, I don't know if you ever left wing when you were younger, Calvin, but
No.
I was not I was kind of apolitical. I just didn't understand economics, and my girlfriend told me to vote Labour once, so I did. But I always kind of hated the way the feminists had infiltrated my comic books. But I always had this instinctive knowledge of, wait, everyone owns everything? That's just not going to work, is it? I mean, have you seen a park bench?
I've visited communes, right, or proper communities where everyone is of equal value and worth, and everyone has to contribute to a common purse, and it can work with free will. If you choose to opt into a society like that, that's fine. But a whole community, as in like a nation, could never work in that way, because you would have to have a dictatorship. You'd have to have absolute power to make everyone contribute in an equal way.
They also have an international scope, and so you will never be left alone as long as communism exists, because they truly believe that inequality exists as a conspiracy by the wealthy, and because they believe it's a moral grievance, they believe they have an imperial mandate to wipe out that grievance worldwide.
Inequality is natural.
Yeah. Like, you're way taller than me. You're going to be a way better basketball player. It's just going to happen.
Right.
You know? So if we go on to the next, I just thought we'd, just before we finish, look at this particular poem by Marx when he was younger. And as an even better versed man of faith than me, you might see the animating principle behind his ideology in this. So a god has snatched from me my all in the curse and rack of destiny. All his worlds are gone beyond recall. Nothing but revenge is left to me. On myself revenge I'll proudly wreak. On that being, that enthroned lord, make my strength a patchwork of what's weak. Leave my better self without reward. I shall build my throne high overhead. Cold tremendous shall its summit be. For its bulwark superstitious dread. For its marshal blackest agony. Who looks on it with a healthy eye shall turn back, struck deathly pale and dumb, clutched by blind and chill mortality, may his happiness prepare his tomb, and the Almighty's lightning shall rebound from that massive iron giant. If he bring my walls and towers down, eternity shall raise them up defiant. That sounds like the words of Lucifer.
He's a very forgiving man, isn't he?
Well,
it does sound Luciferian.
He's saying that I am utterly miserable. I am a wretched creature. I've not achieved all I wanted. So I will deface my own image to defile an image of God out of spite. And then I'll build a parallel structure like a Tower of Babel to get back up to God, dethrone him, and any time he comes at me to retake the throne, I will maintain it through pure avarice. And people wonder why communism always erupts into murderous dictatorship. Like, that seems like the motivations of someone under the sway of some kind of demon.
That is the leftist idea of equality, though, isn't it? Everyone being equally poor and equally miserable. That pretty much sums it up.
Marx genuinely has a quote that I'll include in my essay where he admits we're going to have to eradicate everything except the lowest common denominator. It was always the goal to make you poor and servile.
Yeah.
That abundance was impossible. So
You will own nothing and you will be happy.
Yeah.
Or will you?
Yeah. It's almost like happiness isn't the goal, but communism is. So, but don't worry, the WEF's a conspiracy theory. I've been reliably informed by Mike Graham. So if we go on to the last one, I just thought I'd propose this. Do we keep his statue? Now, number one, it's kind of hilarious that you have to pay to go and see it, right? You've got to pay a fee to go and see the communist grave. Fine. But someone defiled it a little while ago, and people were saying, oh, isn't it terrible that we defaced statue? Any statue we don't like, we have to keep up as a reminder to history. There's no plaque about all the people his ideology has murdered there. It's just got workers of all lands unite. So it's actively promoting the communist ideal with a gigantic bust of the man, like it's some sort of religious artifact.
Yeah.
Why is his and Engels statue in Manchester still up? Because I don't think we should be celebrating anyone else that has called for genocide. How do you feel about this?
Oof, on the spot. I don't believe in tearing down statues. I don't know what we would gain from removing it, other than stoking up the hard left. I think it's more interesting to see who venerates the statue and who it attracts, and you could put together a watch list from that if you were the MI5 looking for extremists rather than looking for Catholics or whatever they do these days. Yeah, I'm not in favour of tearing it down, if I'm honest with you.
That's fair. I do admire James Lindsay putting out a photo yesterday of him mock urinating on it. At least that gave me a chuckle. But I just don't think we should celebrate false idols of the people that deliberately would like to subvert our entire culture. But I understand the argument.
There are many people
like
that. There are many statues, in and around Parliament of people that would have seen us undermine our entire way of life.
Yeah, Nelson Mandela. Yeah, definitely.
I was thinking more Cromwell and.
Well, he did bomb a train,
But I think the point is that it's not necessarily celebrating their ideology.
Mm.
It's recognizing them for something, but also remembering that period of history.
I think without a plaque, it does.
So
it
you
does
believe in
endorse.
contextualizing these statues?
At least, yeah.
Okay.
I wouldn't be opposed to dynamite because I'm a Guy Fawkes kind of Catholic, but I understand. I think a giant plaque written by the most informed type of people on the atrocities of communism, or perhaps just some Solzhenitsyn quotes draped around it like bunting, would go a long way to correct the monstrosity of history.
Yeah, maybe there is a line, because we wouldn't have a statue of Hitler, would we?
Nope.
So
Well,
I
the
suppose-
USSR tore down statues of Lenin,
Yeah.
so I think we're going to have to assert our values at some point. We just have to be prudent in the line that we draw with that.
Yeah,
Because the idea that we can have this apathetic liberalism and have monuments like this still up doesn't really wash. It just lets us be exploited.
No, I think you're right, actually. I'm being too liberal. You're right. Let's tear it down.
That's the first time I've ever heard you say that, Calvin. So Lotus is exclusive. Well, happy anniversary, Marx, for yesterday. I hope you're nice and toasty downstairs in hell. The best thing we can do is eradicate the influence of communism, the haunting spectre over all of our nations, and that's the best way to honour all of its victims.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the premium hangouts, this episode on How Do We Save England. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.